Everyone's been talking about Joe Biden's infrastructure plan. We're going to get a little bit deeper into the weeds on it, what's in it, how he's paying for it, and what the prospects are for moving it through Congress. So what is in this plan? You've probably heard the numbers thrown around, anywhere from $2 to $3 trillion, depending on how it's sliced and diced. Think of it as three buckets that are roughly $600 billion. The first big bucket is about $621 billion. That's billion with a B. Huge investment in electrical vehicles. So that's not actually building anything. That's just getting all of us to try and go electric. Then you get into the transportation components that are actual physical infrastructure. There's $115 billion for roads and bridges. That's what most Americans think of as infrastructure. Public transit, railways, disaster resilience. A lot of that has to do with climate change mitigation. Airports, waterways, and ports. For all the talk about how infrastructure can and should be a bipartisan issue, Democrats and Republicans, just like every other issue, they think about this a lot differently.
Joe Biden wants to come along and jack up taxes.
It provides more subsidy for electric cars than it does for roads and bridges combined.
So in this category of buildings and utilities, you have a lot of money, about $10 billion to fix things like the infrastructure of community colleges, federal buildings, veterans hospitals, childcare facilities, public schools. The electric grid, our water system, eliminating lead pipes. They also throw into that category $100 billion for high-speed broadband. We might not think of the internet as infrastructure, but that is very much the way the Biden administration is thinking about it. And then this final bucket, also around $600 billion, is jobs and innovation. This is for big investments in American manufacturing. Since a huge component of this bill is investing in green technology, the Biden administration is marrying their desire for more American manufacturing with their desire to combat climate change, and is spending huge amounts of money on giving a boost to American battery manufacturing or solar or wind power. And this is sort of a controversial area because there are some people in the green movement who will say, you know what, we don't really have the time to build an American battery manufacturing capacity. It's cheaper just to buy it from China. This sometimes is called industrial policy. It used to be kind of a bad word in American politics. You didn't want the government choosing winners and losers. But this bill really embraces industrial policy. It embraces the idea that the government should be helping certain industries. Now, Trump also talked a lot about bringing American manufacturing back. He pretty much didn't care what was manufactured, right? Democrats do. At least their policies will lead to certain industries declining. For instance, the coal industry, right? And so there's a lot of money in this bill for industries like that, for workers who suffer through the dislocation as we move to a green economy, for job retraining and tax breaks to develop new skills. One of the ideas infused in the infrastructure bill has to do with equity. When you start getting into the line-by-line spending items, there's room for a lot of disagreement between liberals and conservatives. The biggest single pot of money is this $400 billion for in-home caregiving. Most of that money goes to Medicaid. The Biden administration has talked previously about a caregiving crisis, and this is meant to address that, to boost the salaries of people in that profession. It will have a disproportionate positive impact on a group of Americans that happen to have been very important to getting Joe Biden elected, and that is women of color. And I think there are some people sort of scratching their head as to why it ended up in this jobs bill. We have not seen any influential Republicans come out and talk about this bill as something that they're likely to support. They've seized on how Joe Biden wants to pay for this. He wants to increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. So I asked Chief of Staff Ron Klain about this the other day. What's his argument to those folks?
Some rate lower than 35, but not all the way down to 21 was where this should land. There's a lot of policy conversation around being in the mid-20s, and I think Trump kind of came up with the surprise 21% rate. So I do think between 21 and 35, there's a lot of room, and we think 28 is a pretty reasonable number between the two.
It's much more likely that they will do what they did with the COVID relief bill and use the process of budget reconciliation. If he passes this enormous bill, it will be a huge achievement that he will use in his reelection campaign, and most Republicans don't want that. Even if he passes nothing else for the next 2 years, that's more than a lot of other presidents have done in their first term.